Welcome to War on Comic. I'm Roger, and let's get started. 370 Ukrainian drones paralyzed the heart of Moscow, and the city was engulfed in flames like no one expected. It was 8:46 a.m. on October 6, 2025. A low, almost imperceptible hum rose over the horizon. It wasn't thunder, it was a tide of tiny engines advancing with purpose. From 6 hidden fields, the swarm deployed, a river of carbon and code slipping along riverbeds under power lines between rows of trees. They arrived not as an army, but as weather, and then the skyline gave them away. Explosions punched through glass ribs along the financial district. Slender columns of flame licked mirrored towers. Transformer yards exhaled smoke. Subway stations went dark. Trains froze in tunnels as orange light stained the horizon. Office floors emptied into streets choked with ash and alarms. Cameras caught sparks on rooftops. Then a widening blackout swept neighborhoods like a hand closing a curtain. If you'd watched that morning unfold, would you have seen a breach or the start of a new doctrine of war? Tell me, which do you think it was? 3:09 a.m. on October 4th, 2025. An hour made for sleep. Yet the air carried calculations over western Ukraine. The night split open, not with thunder but with cold, disciplined engines. 31 cruise missiles and 21 one-way drones crossed the border in staggered waves, traveling at 540 knots and skimming no more than 120 meters above the ground. Their route threaded power lines, riverbeds, and abandoned grain silos, precision built to hide in silence. Air raid sirens kicked in at 87 seconds, echoing across 3 provinces. Cell towers logged over 128,000 emergency pings before dawn. In bunkers, parents hugged children. In hospitals, staff scrambled to move incubators before the lights flickered. In Kiev's underground command deck, screens flooded with warnings, coordinates, altitudes, threat vectors. Defense crews launched intercept patterns. NAS, IRIS-T, and Patriot coverage overlapped in a 40-kilometer defensive ring. Algorithms filtered trajectories faster than human thought, 73% intercepted. A number that sounded like victory on paper, but paper doesn't feel the heat. 9 dead, 29 wounded, 2,453 residents displaced in under 6 minutes and 42 seconds. A pediatric wing shattered by blast wave. 43 neonatal beds evacuated by hand. A fuel depot in Brody exploded, burning 184,000 liters in a rolling column that stained the horizon like grief made physical. The power grid cycled, collapsed, rebooted, failed again. 12 substations staggering offline in sequence. Rail sensors frozen along a 60-kilometer stretch, paralyzing 3 commuter lines. And yet, inside the bunker, no screams, no fists against steel, just controlled breaths, steady taps of a pencil, and the silent rhythm of minds sharpening into strategy. Someone marked a map, not an attack route, a corridor of silence. They measured not rage, but angles, not emotion, but airspace. Ukraine was learning that victory in modern war isn't just force, it's geometry, signal, rhythm. A voice spoke just above a whisper. If they rely on distance and height, what happens when we fight from below? No applause, no slogans, just nods. Steady, inevitable. Outside, night crews battled flames and shock. Inside, the mission board updated. Phase 1, absorb the blow. Phase 2, speak without sound. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the story had. Speak without sound. Back in the mission board loft. 8:46 a.m. on October 6th, 2025. No roar, no contrails, just motion, quiet, deliberate, and low enough to blend with the wind humming through autumn branches. From 6 scattered launch fields disguised as farms, scrapyards, and storage lots. Technicians pulled back tarps and checked final telemetry. No brass here, no metal. Just steady hands with intent as 370 airframes stirred awake. Each no heavier than 25 kilograms, each costing less than $2,000. each born not in factories but in workshops where imagination outran budget. They didn't climb like planes. They flattened, hugging the earth, following irrigation ditches, river bends, rail lines, a formation shaped not by parade geometry but by terrain logic. A low layer rising near 160 meters, a mid-band weaving between rooftops and treetops, an attack layer moving at 8 to 20 meters, nearly grazing phone wires. 47 minutes later, Moscow's outer sensors saw nothing unusual until intersections flickered, then went dark. One substation tripped, then another, then four, and the skyline rippled. 81 controlled impacts in just over 11 minutes. Not firestorms, precise disruptions, relay cabinets on rooftops blown, fiber splice junctions scorched, telecom masts coughing smoke into the morning air, subway trains grinding to a halt mid-tunnel, freezing over 1,800 passengers in stillness. Emergency call volume spiked past 1,600 reports in minutes. Cameras showed smoke curling like thin brushstrokes over glass towers while traffic lights blinked red in helpless stutter. In the Russian command net, intercept orders arrived late. Over 160 missiles launched into open sky, a show of force aimed at altitude while the threat crawled below like logic slipping under a locked door. No sweeping blast, no grand spectacle, just precision carving silence into infrastructure, proving a closely watched sky can still be pierced if the attack never leaves the ground. 10:21 a.m. in Kyiv, under concrete and earth. Above, trams rattled over steel rails, markets opened, life moved. Below, deeper than metro lines and older than peace. A room glowed with screens that didn't blink. No generals, no admirals, just 43 operators, 18 software engineers, 9 RF specialists, and a cluster of analysts tracing signal drift across 600 kilometers of airspace. Average age barely past military draft. Their battle screens mosaicked with telemetry, flight logic, thermal mapping, and fail-switch routing. For months, they'd simulated this hour. 430-plus hours of swarm modeling, signal testing through 17 jamming zones, telemetry scraped from 9 million flight data points stitched from rural sensors, volunteer weather stations, and repurposed civilian antennas hidden in barns, silos, and apartment roofs. Not rage repeated, not revenge, precision. Every unit in the sky carried triple-band frequency backups, 5 terrain-guided route branches, and the ability to dissolve formation and reform in under 5 seconds. Each drone small enough to discard, cheap enough to replace, smart enough to adjust before humans finish reacting. On a side monitor, failure counts slid in calm digits. 52 downed, 72 disrupted by border jamming arcs, but 200 plus still gliding forward, linking and relinking like thought moving through circuits. A sudden spike, Russian counter-jamming surge. Hands moved without hesitation. Frequencies shifted. Routing curved around a 14-kilometer electronic dead zone. Drones folding into new geometry as if wind, not war, shaped them. No cheers, no raised fists, just breath and numbers and the hum of computation. Above this bunker, daylight touched Kyiv like any other morning. Down here, a quiet reality solidified. Steel was no longer the threshold of power. Signal was. And in that silence, strategy sharpened. Not loud, not seen, but undeniably advancing. Moscow's defense grid braced for clarity and found chaos instead. Radar screens lit with ghost echoes, altitude spikes dissolving into ground clutter, returns jittering like static trapped in a storm. Operators cycled filters again and again, pulse Doppler, terrain masking, low-band sweeps, every algorithm insisting on a truth no doctrine had prepared for. Nothing was where it should be. Then the city itself answered. A relay hub in Ramenki flickered out. Seconds later, a feeder line in Troparivo-Nikulino tripped, forcing power reroutes to 90 megawatts over capacity. By minute 3, 4 high-voltage substations executed emergency isolation to stop a cascading grid collapse, leaving swaths of residential blocks dimming like lungs exhaling too long. Intercept orders finally snapped through the net. Over 160 interceptors slicing upward through the haze, an exhibition meant to project dominance, and yet altitude wasn't the battlefield. The threat crawled below, hugging rail lines, rivers, tram cables, drifting through treetops and industrial corridors. At 8 to 20 meters, too low for confident triggers, the two coordinated to be luck. Of the nearly 400 launched, 219 were already inside the inner ring. Most carried just 2 kilograms of payload, but their effect was outsized. Rooftop-mounted switching cabinets scorched, telecom repeaters silenced, microwave backhaul links spitting failure. Traffic across 26 intersections stalled in blinking confusion. Corporate networks choked, a data node near Dorogomolovo dropping into cold emergency shutdown to protect server stacks. On broadcast screens, bright footage of intercepts looped in victory reels. But on secure channels, a classified notification spread. Stark and clinical. Low-altitude breach at scale. Detection delay, 11 minutes and 42 seconds. Response saturation confirmed. Steel hadn't been broken, it had been bypassed. A fortress built to look up had been struck by what learned to move just above the Earth, and in that narrow band, certainty unraveled. 9:52 a.m. on October 7th, 2025. Moscow woke not to destruction but to something colder, absence where certainty once lived, elevators hanging between floors, steel pods silent, holding over 600 people in suspended time, traffic lights blinking over empty intersections, red and amber stuttering like a stunned heartbeat, apartment towers humming on backup power as generators fought fatigue. Every minute a quiet reminder that stability now had limits. 83 precise impacts, not aimed at monuments but at function. Rooftop relay cabinets scorched, fiber splice nodes severed, 2 kilovolt substations tripped to prevent cascading failure across the grid. And in 31 residential districts, darkness creeping through hallways as emergency lights flickered against concrete stairs. Hospitals bracing. One in Davidkovo calculated just 9 hours of reliable generator fuel at ICU load. Ambulances rerouted manually, dispatch cycling through analog backups when digital channels lagged 47 seconds. A small delay that felt massive when time measured lives, 15 confirmed dead, 51 injured. Over 40,000 residents displaced, guided to temporary shelters lit by portable lamps and uneasy whispers. And yet no building collapsed, no skyline crumbled. What failed was confidence, quietly, relentlessly. Public broadcasts celebrated interceptors. State headlines praised resilience, but internal logs recorded grid desync, relay burnout, and 6 emergency grid partitions triggered to stop a wider blackout. This wasn't conquest, it was precise disruption, a reminder that power can bend without breaking and fear can rise without a single tower falling. Above ground, smoke curled soft against glass facades. Below, a city listened to generators instead of certainty. And in that mechanical hum, Moscow learned something ancient dressed in modern wires. Sometimes a capital doesn't fall, it pauses. And in that pause, the world changes. 6 p.m. on October 8th, 2025. The smoke over Moscow thinned. Streetlights flickered back, one district at a time, and subway lines stirred into motion like nerves returning after shock. On the surface, normalcy reappeared. But beneath, systems ran heavy diagnostics in loops, backups humming, invisible stress threaded through steel. Internal reports circulated in corridors. No camera sees 14% network disruption across comms nodes, emergency fuel usage up 60%, and infrastructure repair estimates climbing toward $2.5 billion. Nearly 50,000 residents displaced or sheltered, not by collapse, but by precaution. One line in a security briefing carried more weight than explosions ever could. 2,000 platforms degraded by $500 billion in defenses. Across the Atlantic, analysts traced radar gaps, signal trails, and flight logs into the night. Words repeated like a new vocabulary of conflict: low altitude, adaptive routing, distributed autonomy. But hold on, friend. Let's go back further because this story didn't start with buzzes over Moscow's sky. Let's start at the beginning, in those long nights in Kharkiv basements, where a crew of programmers with cracked laptops and recycled car batteries dreamed of flipping the board. Picture this: late September 2025, and the Eastern Front groans under Russian artillery weight. But in an improvised workshop under flickering LED lights, an engineer named Alexei, with dark circles telling tales of weeks without sleep, tweaks the code on a homemade FPV drone. It's not a $1 million missile, it's a carbon fiber quadcopter armed with a hand grenade and guided by AI that learns from every failed flight. It's not about hitting hard, a guy like him once told me in an interview I saw. It's about hitting where it hurts and where they don't expect it. And it hurts in the nerves, in the veins of a city that thinks itself untouchable. Thanks for joining this raw look at the edges of modern war. It reminds us that in chaos, human cunning shines brighter than any explosion. To stay informed by Comic on War and receive the latest news, you must click the subscribe button, activate the bell, and stay tuned. Remember, have your evacuation bunker ready and know where the entrance keys are as a rule of thumb, until the next explosion or missile alert.